was accustomed to wear upon the third finger of his left hand, the very finger that is missing from the remains that were found, a most peculiar ring, which fitted so tightly that he was unable to get it off after once putting it on, a ring, gentlemen, of so peculiar a pattern that had it been found on the body must have instantly established the identity of the remains. In a word, gentlemen, the remains which have been found are those of a man exactly like the testator. They differ from him in no respects whatever. They display a mutilation which suggests an attempt to conceal an identifying peculiarity which he undoubtedly presented, and they were deposited in their various hiding places about the time of the testator's disappearance. Accordingly, when you have heard these facts, proved by the sworn testimony of competent witnesses, together with the facts relating to the disappearance, I shall ask you for a verdict in accordance with that evidence." Mr. Loram sat down, and adjusting a pair of pince-nez, rapidly glanced over his brief while the usher was administering the oath to the first witness. This was Mr. Jellicoe, who stepped into the box and directed a stony gaze at the apparently unconscious judge. The usual preliminaries having been gone through, Mr. Loram proceeded to examine him. "You were the testator's solicitor and confidential agent, I believe?" "I was, and am." "How long have you known him?" 27 years. "Judging from your experience of him, should you say that he was a person likely to disappear voluntarily and suddenly to cease to communicate with his friends?" "No." "Kindly give your reasons for that opinion." "Such conduct on the part of the testator would be entirely opposed to his habits and character as they are known to me. He was exceedingly regular and businesslike in his dealings with me. When traveling abroad, he always kept me informed as to his whereabouts, or, if he was likely to be beyond reach of communication, he always advised me beforehand. One of my duties was to collect a pension which he drew from the Foreign Office, and on no occasion, previous to his disappearance, has he ever failed to furnish me punctually with the necessary documents." "Had he, so far as you know, any reasons for wishing to disappear?" "No." "When and where did you last see him alive?" "At 6 o'clock in the evening, on the 14th of October, 1902, at 141 Queen Square, Bloomsbury." "Kindly tell us what happened on that occasion." "The testator had called for me at my office at 3:15, and asked me to come with him to his house to meet Dr. Norbury. I accompanied him to 141 Queen Square, and shortly after we arrived, Dr. Norbury came to look at some antiquities that the testator proposed to give to the British Museum. The gift consisted of a mummy and 4 canopic jars and other tomb furniture, which the testator stipulated should be exhibited together in a single case, and in the state in which they were then presented. Of these objects, the mummy only was ready for inspection. The tomb furniture had not yet arrived in England, but was expected within a week. Dr. Norbury accepted the gift on behalf of the museum, but could not take possession of the objects until he had communicated with the director and obtained his formal authority. The testator accordingly gave me certain instructions concerning the delivery of the gift, as he was leaving England that evening." "Are those instructions relevant to the subject of this inquiry?" "I think they are. The testator was going to Paris, and perhaps from thence to Vienna. He instructed me to receive and unpack the tomb furniture on its arrival, and to store it, with the mummy, in a particular room, where it was to remain for 3 weeks. If he returned within that time, he was to hand it over in person to the museum authorities. If he had not returned within that time, he desired me to notify the museum authorities that they were at liberty to take possession of and remove the collection at their convenience. From these instructions I gathered that the testator was uncertain as to the length of his absence from England and the extent of his journey." "Did he state precisely where he was going?" "No. He said he was going to Paris and perhaps to Vienna, but he gave no particulars and I asked for none." "Do you, in fact, know where he went?" "No. He left the house at 6 o'clock, wearing a long, heavy overcoat, and carrying a suitcase and an umbrella. I wished him good bye at the door, and watched him walk away as if going toward Southampton Row. I have no idea where he went, and I never saw him again." "Had he no other luggage than the suitcase?" "I don't know, but I believe not. He was accustomed to travel with the bare necessaries, and to buy anything further he wanted en route." "Did he say anything to the servants as to the probable date of his return?" "There were no servants excepting the caretaker. The house was not used for residential purposes. The testator slept and took his meals at his club, though he kept his clothes at the house." "Did you receive any communication from him after he left?" "No. I never heard from him again in any way. I waited for 3 weeks as he had instructed me, and then notified the museum authorities that the collection was ready for removal. 5 days later Dr. Norbury came and took formal possession of it, and it was transferred to the museum forthwith." "When did you next hear of the testator?" "On the 23rd of November following, at 7:15 in the evening. Mr. George Hurst came to my rooms, which are over my office, and informed me that the testator had called at his house during his absence, and had been shown into the study to wait for him. That on his, Mr. Hurst's, arrival, it was found that the testator had disappeared, without acquainting the servants of his intended departure, and without being seen by anyone to leave the house. Mr. Hurst thought this so remarkable that he had hastened up to town to inform me. I also thought it a remarkable circumstance, especially as I had received no communication from the testator, and we both decided that it was advisable to inform the testator's brother, Godfrey, of what had happened. Accordingly, Mr. Hurst and I proceeded as quickly as possible to Liverpool Street, and took the first train available to Woodford, where Mr. Godfrey Bellingham then resided. We arrived at his house at 5 minutes to 9, and were informed by the servant that he was not at home, but that his daughter was in the library, which was a detached building situated in the grounds. The servant lighted a lantern and conducted us through the grounds to the library, where we found Mr. Godfrey Bellingham and Miss Bellingham. Mr. Godfrey had only just come in, and had entered by the back gate, which had a bell that rang in the library. Mr. Hurst informed Mr. Godfrey of what had occurred, and then we left the library to walk up to the house. A few paces from the library I noticed by the light of the lantern, which Mr. Godfrey was carrying, a small object lying on the lawn. I pointed it out to him, and he picked it up, and then we all recognized it as a scarab that the testator was accustomed to wear on his watch chain. It was fitted with a gold wire, passed through the suspension hole, and a gold ring. Both the wire and the ring were in position, but the ring was broken. We went to the house and questioned the servants as to visitors, but none of them had seen the testator, and they all agreed that no visitor whatsoever had come to the house during the afternoon or evening. Mr. Godfrey and Miss Bellingham both declared that they had neither seen nor heard anything of the testator, and were both unaware that he had returned to England. As the circumstances were somewhat disquieting, I communicated on the following morning with the police, and requested them to make inquiries, which they did, with the result that a suitcase bearing the initials J.B. was found to be lying unclaimed in the cloakroom at Charing Cross Station. I was able to identify the suitcase as that which I had seen the testator carry away from Queen Square. I was also able to identify some of the contents. I interviewed the cloakroom attendant, who informed me that the suitcase had been deposited on the 23rd about 4:15 p.m. He had no recollection of the person who deposited it. It remained unclaimed in the possession of the railway company for 3 months, and was then surrendered to me. Were there any marks or labels on it showing the route by which it had traveled? There were no labels on it, and no marks other than the initials J.B. Do you happen to know the testator's age? Yes, he was 59 on the 11th of October, 1902. Can you tell us what his height was? Yes, he was exactly 5 feet 8 inches. What sort of health had he? So far as I know, his health was good. I am not aware that he suffered from any disease. I am only judging by his appearance, which was that of a healthy man. Should you describe him as well preserved or otherwise?